Good evening. My name is Kai Bird. I'm the director of the Leon Levy Center for Biography.
Yeah.
And this is our 10th anniversary, actually. 10 years of promoting biography, all due to our one benefactor, Shelby White. And part of our job is to hold events like this, but we also hand out about $250,000 a year in fellowships to budding biographers. And so there are 4 this year, Bruce Weber on E.L. Doctorow. Bruce is right here in the front row. He's hard at work on Doctorow. Eleanor Randolph on Michael Bloomberg. Eleanor's not here. I think she has another event. Justin Gifford on Eldridge Cleaver, and Justin is in the back. Lindsay Whalen on Mary Oliver, and Lindsay is not here. She's on her way to interview Mary Oliver for the 15th time. And finally, Mickey Kaufman on Henry Kissinger. The deadline for new fellows applying is December 15th. So you all have exactly 2 days to submit your fellowships applications. And this autumn we've had a number of great events with William Dalrymple and Anita Anand, William Taubman, Vanda Kreft, and James Atlas. We've also honored Robert Wheel, an editor at Norton, who is known as an editor of many prestigious biographies. It may be premature, but I'd also like to announce or mention that last week we finally got the English and History departments here at CUNY to approve a draft proposal for the establishment of a 2-year master's program in biography. I'm quite excited about this. Nothing like it exists anywhere in the country or anywhere in the world, as far as I know. And it remains to be seen whether it becomes a reality. There are many bureaucratic hurdles to still overcome in the university bureaucracy. And it remains a somewhat controversial idea, even among biographers, partly because biography is such a diverse discipline. And working biographers are such an iconoclastic lot. They're very difficult. They're monks and nuns working alone all day. And, well, one wonders if the craft of biography can actually be taught. I think it can. I know as a biographer that I frequently got lost, wandering down too many endless rabbit holes, and this cost me time and money. So I think there are lessons to be learned. Anyway, tonight we have David Yaffe on his wonderful biography of the iconic Joni Mitchell, Reckless Daughter. David will be interrogated by Eric Banks, and I hope Eric has a chance to ask David about some of David's own journeys through rabbit holes in Joni Mitchell's life story. Eric is without doubt one of our most perceptive cultural critics. Today he's the director of the New York Institute for Humanities. He also has worked as an editor at Art Forum and Book Forum. He's a past president of the National Book Critics Circle. His work has appeared in numerous publications, including the New York Times Book Review, the Financial Times, Slate, and the Journal of Higher Education, Chronicle of Higher Education. David Yaffe is a professor of humanities at Syracuse University and a 2012 winner of the Roger Shattuck Prize for Criticism. His writing has also appeared in many publications, including The Nation, Harper's, the New York Times. He's also the author of Bob Dylan, Like a Complete Unknown, and a book called Fascinating Rhythm, Reading Jazz in American Writing. So at this point, I turn the stage over to Eric, who will interrogate the author. Thank you.
No, I didn't know I was being called on to interrogate you, David.
We're in Guantanamo.
Happy to.
Yeah.
Congratulations, it's such a great achievement. And I'm so happy to have this book in the world. I've known you for so long, David wrote for me when I was editor of Book Forum and many, many years ago, and one of the things that you really combined was this, very, I think, somewhat scholarly interest in music and in music criticism, but you wrote like a non-academic. You were of the academy, but not from the academy. I'm not sure if it should go the other way around, but that certainly informed all of your writing and all of your thinking about criticism, and I think it's something that really fit in very, very well, in the kind of world of book form, and it certainly is one of the really great things about this biography. It's one of the things that makes it incredibly special, I think, is the depth that you go into, the depth you consider when you're writing about the music. I think it's so gripping and it's so completely interesting, I think, for people who may not have a full sense of Joni Mitchell's career and the real breadth of her work and what makes her original. And we do have a piano here, as most of you heard already, and David is a very good pianist as well. So I think as we go on, I hope that you'll just take advantage of that and demonstrate a little bit about what it is that you find so incredibly original about her music, and also what drew you in and what made you want to sort of approach it in the way that you did. But before we get to that, I do want to start with at the place that you start in the book, which is talk about the genesis of this biography. You started out very much on a personal note. You were writing a profile of Joni Mitchell in 2005?
2007.
2007 for the New York Times.
Yes.
So why don't you tell us what that was about and take us from there.
Well, when I got there, I knew. Am I audible to all?
Yes.
By the way, good. When I no, that's good advice, though.
Don't look at me.
I might do neither at some points, but when I got that assignment, I had already been planning on writing this book. I'd been planning on writing it for over a year. And it was the very beginning of Google Alerts. So I had Joni on my Google Alerts, and most of what came through wasn't usable, but this little item came through, and when I saw this little item, I felt like Truman Capote seeing a little headline about a murder, right? Yes. It was. I felt a little bit like that, because this tiny little item said, it was in the Vancouver Sun, I think, and it said that that the Alberta Ballet would be doing the music of Joni Mitchell. That right away was not remarkable news. But then it said that Joni had become involved in it. So now this is getting more interesting. And then it said that as it happened, Joni was writing songs for a new album, her first album of new material in 10 years. Mm-hmm. Now suddenly this is very interesting. And so I got an assignment from the New York Times to talk to her about it. And she hadn't done press very much, you know. She'd done a couple of interviews, but not many. And so I had no idea what to expect.
Was she already at that point nervous about doing interviews and removed from making media appearances?
See, this choreographer was so eager to get his dance company into the New York Times, and Joni happened to love him. Mm-hmm. So he was going to use that. He was going to leverage that, right? Mm-hmm. So first he said, Joni, she doesn't speak to anybody ever. You're never going to talk to her. I said, I know. It's never, ever going to happen. It's never going to happen. I said, I understand. But I have told her about you, and she's kind of interested, but she's never going to speak to you. But the resistance, it wore down. Mm-hmm. And we were writing to each other. It happened that it was my birthday, and he said, I have a birthday present for you. And suddenly, I'm on a plane to Los Angeles, and getting ready to meet Mary, Queen of Scots, basically. Mm-hmm. And it was unbelievable. I remember, this was in Brentwood. I learned later, this was a rather mediocre restaurant. The reason why we were at this restaurant was because it was on a list of places in Los Angeles that were willing to have Joni smoke and accrue the fines, because it was an honor to have her smoke there. So this was one of those places. And I had a little extra time. I had some deep tissue massage. The one massaging me she said, "Wow, you're really tense." And I said, "Yeah, I'm interviewing somebody." Now, this is Los Angeles, so that could mean anybody, right? She said, "Who?" I said, "Joni Mitchell." So like, "Joni Mitchell, oh my God." And then she got deeper. And then she said, "Well, when was your birthday?" I said, "I just had it." She said, "Well, Capricorns and Scorpios get along really well."
So you went in with the astrological blessings. Okay,
This was okay. So you know, and then I get to the restaurant, and I'm so tense that I actually like crush the wine glass. Anyway, eventually, you know, I'm told where she likes to sit, and I'm reading Nietzsche because I know she's fond of Nietzsche, and I'm reading this Kipling poem "If" because I knew that she set it to music. And finally, she appeared exactly half an hour late, and she was wearing the same beret that's on the cover of Hey Jura, and rings on every finger. And she outstretches her hand and she says, "I'm Joni." And I said, "I know."
And then you hit it off perfectly.
Oh my God.
It's really a long interview.
It was a very Joni experience. It's sort of like actually all of her romances, right? Because it starts off so magically, and she talks about how horrible all the others are. All of them. They all disappointed her. Every single one of them. Even Cameron Crowe, who became her friend, when he did that Rolling Stone cover story about her in 1979, she thought he was so great until she saw the piece, and then she was so disappointed.
And did she raise this at the very first meeting? She
Oh,
saw
yes.
Cameron Crowe's interview from 1979.
Yes.
And the warning signs weren't going off immediately.
Well,
This might be a bit more
It's like
difficult than.
It's like what happens at the beginning of a romance. You think it's amazing. She said, "You're the only one. You're the only one. The rest of them are horrible. You're the only one. You're better than all of them." And until she read the piece.
Yeah.
And then suddenly I was
You
the
go
worst.
back and you write the piece. Have you already started to talk to her about, like, in the process of this long evening about maybe doing a biography?
Yes.
And she's into it.
Oh, she was into it. And she said, "You know what? I was just rear-ended by a teenager when I was on my way from the recording studio. And I thought to myself, wow, I really need a biographer."
Okay, so you go back and you write the piece. She's not happy with it.
No.
Because of one word choice.
That's right.
Supposedly. So.
That's right. Let me just put this in context a little bit. When I'm in the kitchen of her beautiful home, which is really like a college campus, like a beautiful sanctuary, right, of like a few properties, right? It's Bel Air, beautiful views of the Pacific, the works. Renaissance antiques, all of her own paintings. Each painting has a story. You know, I couldn't believe it. It was so much to take in. I couldn't believe it. And but yet I took a little comfort in the fact that she had a kind of ordinary kitchen, and that her kitchen sort of looked like my kitchen. It had Post-its around. It had books piled up. You know what I mean? Mail unopened. She never used the kitchen, right? So, anyways, I took a little comfort. Hey, her kitchen's sort of like my kitchen. It makes me feel, you know, comforted somehow. We're both mortals, even though we weren't. And so the word that I used, which I just will always live to regret, the word that I used to describe the kitchen, which was then edited into describing the whole house, was middle class. Oh my God. Oh my God. I mean, she was just ranting at me on the phone, and she said, "You think I'm just some bourgeois?" She said, "I don't know what you consider to be middle class." And I thought, well, gee, it's true, you know. I grew up in a house with an automatic garage door opener. I lived it up.
And so she broke off contact.
Well, not after the piece, no. We kept on talking. Yeah.
Okay.
That kept going. Yeah.
Well, then can you say a little bit more about...
At first I thought, because, see, originally I was going to cover the ballet, which was in Alberta, which was in Calgary. But then the Times decided they wanted me to preview it instead. but I already had the tickets and I already had the hotel. And Jean, the choreographer, really wanted me to come. And I thought, well, gee, this could be the best or the worst, you know? And when I finally made it there, and I figured out where, it was easy to figure out where her room was. It was right catty-corner to mine. I could smell the cigarette smoke. And I could hear these tracks from Shine, which no mortals had heard. I'd heard these tracks. Nobody else had heard these tracks yet.
Yeah.
From the new album, Shine. And so, you know, I showed up the next day when I knew that she was up. I showed up, and I tried to tell Jean, the choreographer, that I was being edited very aggressively, but that I believed in the ballet, and I wanted the word to get out about the ballet, even if it meant that I was edited rather aggressively.
Yeah.
And so I guess this worked because Joni said, well, I understand that you had a Sophie's Choice situation there.
Well put. But it took quite a while for you to totally gain her confidence. I mean, the project broke off a number of times. When did it? Can you just give us a little bit of a sense about, you know, how long it took for it to really, you know, look like it was actually going to appear between covers?
So she stopped speaking to me the following year, and then it was my plan to just write around her. So I talked to everybody that I could. I talked to a lot of people.
Yeah.
And
So that was in 2008.
yeah, and so then in 2014, I was out with a sculptor who I know you know, Nathan Joseph. Nathan Joseph is a sculptor who rented out a loft to Joni on Varick Street from 1978 to 1987. And she wrote a song about him called Good Friends. And so we just went out and we had a really good time. We didn't really talk about Joni. We talked about, you know, art and stuff. And we just had a good time. And so I get this email from him the next day, and he said, Joni wants you to call her, just like that.
Yeah.
So he must have told her that he had a great time with me, and she decided that she wanted to talk to me again.
And it worked.
And it worked.
And so you picked up and that was around, what year was that?
That was in the fall of 2014.
Okay, so it was about a year before she got really sick.
The aneurysm was March 31st, 2015.
So it's really kind of incredibly good luck. The timing.
Yeah.
The bulk of the interviews that you did,
Yeah.
they were done in that period between 2014 and 2015. The bulk of the interviews with her.
Well, I did a lot of interviews also in 2007, but I think that most of what was usable came in 2014, 2015, and the reason for that was because Joni had a tendency to wander. You know, it was hard to get her focused on what you wanted to talk about. She was going to talk about what she wanted to talk about, which was often the environment, or just things that weren't very helpful. But because I talked to all these other people, she wanted to know what everybody had said.
Right.
You see? And suddenly she was very focused because she wanted to one-up every one of these people. And so every story that I had, she wanted to counter it with the even more dramatic story.
Yeah. No, it's really interesting to think how the book would have really turned out very differently, I imagine, if you had
yes.
it taken its, I don't want to say normal course, but the course that it originally looked like it would take.
I feel like I was making a big budget movie where the stakes were very, very high. The possible rewards, the possible pitfalls. The risk is a high-risk situation.
Because you were, I mean, in what ways?
Because I had a very unstable source, I had a very unstable leading lady.
Well, we'll talk about this a little bit more later, but she has, I assume, not read the book. Have you gotten any?
I know that it was her policy before the aneurysm to not read books about herself. And I imagine that reading a book about yourself must be like the scene in Being John Malkovich, where Malkovich goes into his own portal. And everybody's saying Malkovich, Malkovich, Malkovich.
Yeah.
That must be what that's like. And anyway, so that was her policy anyway. But she did have people around her that would tell her things. So I know, for example, my friend Sheila Weller wrote this book, Girls Like Us, about Joni and Carole King and Carly Simon, and Joni squashed the movie version of it, even though she hadn't read the book. She had just heard about the book.
Do you know who she heard about it from?
could be anyone, just anybody in her circle who read the book.
Right.
She didn't even read the thing. But she just knew that, no, Sheila Weller didn't have my stories, all these stories that she told to me, fortunately.
Yeah.
Yeah.
You start out on this very, very personal note of telling the story before you really go into the biography. What was your strategy or thinking? Why did you want to start your biography on such an autobiographical note?
Because the first question that people always have is why? Why Joni Mitchell? And that's why. And in that way, it's something that had been percolating since I was 15. I'd been sitting on this love of this music and this fascination with this person who made it since I was 15 years old. And it was connected to my intimate life, it was connected to my emotional life, it was connected to my creative life, it was connected to my philosophical life, you know? And so it was sort of like falling in love when you realize that you're completely and totally vulnerable because every part of yourself is connected to it.
Well, it puts you in an interesting position as a biographer because you don't usually think of a relationship that involves love between a biographer and subject. It can be a component, but it's not exactly what you think of as why I want to write the biography of, some other figure.
I feel like the interviews got better in 2014, 2015, when I saw her as a flawed person and as another human, but whose work I still was madly in love with.
Yeah, that's very interesting.
And who I found fascinating, and so I was still fascinated with. But it was when I compared the recordings from 2007 to the recordings from 2014, 2015. 2007, I'm really nervous. I'm laughing too much. I'm trying to show her too eagerly that I get it.
Yeah.
I wasn't like that at all 2014, 2015. I sounded more like FM radio.
Did you?
Is that dated? No. This is a Joni
FM radio?
Krause,
God,
right?
most everything is. Although, one of the things that we can talk about is the way in which it always astonishes me, and much more than anyone else from that period, there's been a couple of Joni Mitchell revivals, but there hasn't been the kind of, someone wrote about this in one of the reviews, I think, comparing her to the Stevie Nicks revival, and which we seem to be undergoing right now, or experiencing right now.
Yes. There's a Stevie Nicks book, so yes.
But there is a way that I think when I was first thinking about the book, I thought of Joni Mitchell being a rather dated subject in many ways, and something that was generational. That's just me, and my own background. I know. I think a lot of things are dated, but at any rate, but I've been really amazed at how that's not the case, and how many people that I don't know how they're even exposed to Joni Mitchell's music have been interested in this biography and really want to read it. I was just sharing an elevator with someone coming up that we started to talk about this, and it's it really does, and I'm not sure even how you talk about it in the book how. She has managed to, I think, speak to a lot of different generations, but I continue to be, just incredibly impressed with that.
Yes, and
it doesn't matter if it's on an LP or if it's, from Spotify.
Yes, and not only do I teach millennials, but I teach classes on Joni Mitchell to millennials. And their sense of what's dated is not like our sense of what's dated. Because they don't really live in any time anymore. That's over. They love Stevie Nicks. They love Taylor Swift. It's all the same thing.
Well,
we can hear the difference, and if they're smart, then they can hear the difference too. But the difference is more negligible to them because they're not generationally defined by a certain sound. Even if, of course, somebody like Kanye is obviously very much of their generation. But not only, they all love the Beatles, right? Almost all of them love the Beatles, right? And they're like the grandchildren of Beatles fans, the original Beatles fans, right?
Yeah.
And so that music is still in the present tense for them. My students went crazy when Paul McCartney came to Syracuse. They went nuts. They got these expensive tickets, even, and I try to say, but he's not as good as he. They don't care. He's Sir Paul fucking McCartney. They don't care.
Right. Right. Well, that was one thing I was going to bring up a little bit later, but since we're talking about it now, do you feel like when you were writing this book, did you really have did you have a reader in mind that you were thinking about, someone who experienced this music, who Joni Mitchell was, meant so much to them in their youth, or even like for us, I think when we were really young, or we had a connection to this music through our parents' experience of the music, which is still a very intimate experience, versus the kind of person who would pick up this book because they really didn't know that much they wanted to know more about the background of the songs. They may know the music, but they don't know the biographical background because they're too young, whatever.
I'll tell you a story because obviously there's a range, I mean, even though I'm a professor, I'm not just writing for other professors. Even though I'm a writer, I'm not just writing for other writers. Although obviously I'm always happy when someone in my field reads me and likes it. That's great. But I'm going as far as I can, right? Let me give you an example. I remember I went into a Rite Aid right before they closed, and there was this woman at the counter. She was about 60. I said, "How are you doing?" And she said, "Living the dream." I thought, that's my reader. You know what I mean? I mean, whatever it was that led her to be in that place, but also whatever it was that led her to see that was funny. Do you know what I mean? I thought, that's my reader. Of course, educated people and all this, but not only. Right? There's a whole range of people that can be touched by Joni's music. Joni said one of her favorite fan letters came from this mafioso lawyer in New Jersey who said, "Joan, I'm so sorry that you had to suffer so much to be our salve."
Wow.
And so you just think about that whole spectrum, I know when people, when a professor, they say, "Oh, I want to reach a broad audience," and what that means is that, like, you know what, I don't want just other English professors to read this, I want biology professors to read it. Now, obviously, if a biology professor reads it and then loves it and that's great.
Yeah.
But you know what I mean? I'm not just going necessarily for one educational level, because I know that Joni's music, anybody who's been fucked over by life can understand that music, right? And maybe especially that woman working at Rite Aid. Or like I would see like women like working token booths and things like that, and thinking, I'm writing for you.
Well, I should be more specific. I really meant a generational question. I mean that the bulk of the large number of people who don't know the period between this great period between Blue and say 1978 or 1979, and I'm even adding a few years to the Luke Manan theory of celebrity, which we can talk about a little bit. That don't have that intimacy with what that music represented, what it said to the world about California, what it said to be about that transition from folk music to kind of like a certain kind of LA rock milieu.
But the internet has opened all of this up, so anybody who's even remotely curious can easily look it up and become fascinated. Which young people, if they're interested in something, they just look it up, and they become instant archivists. Right, and they're fascinated with Joni. Some young women reviewed this book. There's a young rock journalist named Lindsay Zolids who reviewed this for a website called TheRinger.com, and the piece was called "Fear of a Female Genius."
Yeah.
And do you know what I mean? She had like this sort of millennial feminist take on the whole thing.
Do you notice the reception of the book being massively different from younger reviewers, and particularly young women, than other reviewers?
Imagine.
I mean, just when I was looking through the reviews, it did seem like there was a real generational split in the, and this is another thing that's really interesting, is that most people, and it really did not depend on their age, although you certainly saw it with some of the reviews, really had this sort of claim they put forward about whether, you got her, and it was always about a song they remembered. It was always about sort of making a claim on, that that we all have a part of this of Joni Mitchell, which is so much about we all have a part of this performer, of this pop performer, because it was so much a part of our lives.
So you had these millennial women like Lindsay, and then also like Rachel Syme in The Nation.
Yeah, that's the one. That's the review I was really thinking.
They're both around 30, those women, and so they have like a millennial perspective on feminism, and Joni is mythic to them. And so, and it, as if somebody could be as fascinated with, Cleopatra, whoever, right? But yes, the baby boomers, I guess they're more territorial, I guess they are. I'm basically, Joni is my mother's age, like exactly my mother's age, something that she loved to hear.
Yeah, I'm sure she appreciates
She
you.
really did, yeah.
You're letting us know that.
Yes, yes. But anyway, obviously that generation is territorial because they grew up with it.
Uh-huh.
But
I think it's also something that's really specific about the pop and rock star of a certain time.
Yeah.
And we were talking about this the other day. There's this one great story she says about when she was performing, she would always lock eyes with one person in the front row. And it's kind of incredible to think about being on the receiving end of that.
And one of those people was Prince.
Yeah, that's an amazing story. Did you talk to Prince for the biography?
I wish. I would have loved
You've
to.
got the great Prince stories.
There was a great story in there, I know. Prince, he was notoriously intractable, But, a couple of days before he died, he went to a record store in Minneapolis, and he bought 5 CDs, and one of them was Joni Mitchell, Hey Gira.
And he visited her with her frequently. And
Yes, they were friends, and she said when he was a teenager, he would write her these fan letters with the U's and the I, the way that he would write, and they would just toss it in the trash. They thought I was the lunatic fringe, But eventually, Prince was selling millions of records, and Joni wasn't. And Prince tried to teach her how to have a hit. He wrote a song for her called "You Are My Emotional Pump."
Yeah.
And then the chorus went, "You are my emotional pump. You make my body jump."
Yeah, I could. That's
And Joni said,
screams Joni Mitchell.
I know. And Joni said, "I can't sing that."
Uh-huh.
But it's in the vault, though. The Prince version is in the vault.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, I guess what I was starting to try and get at was that one of the real features. I just want to talk a little bit about rock biographies as a genre. I mean, it's a particular kind of biography, and you're going to have a relationship. You have to. I think there's a relationship of fandom that you don't really find in a lot of. I mean, you find them in other genres, but it's almost built into the to the rock biography. It's hard to think about writing a kind of dispassionate rock biography.
Right. That's right.
And I wonder if you would, say something about that, that in relation, like what does the rock biography mean to you? Was it something you grew up with?
Yes. In fact,
we're interested
when I was 12 years old, I was at the peak of my fascination with Jim Morrison, and I read "No One Here Gets Out Alive," the Jim Morrison biography, and I was so obsessed with reading it that I would hide it in my textbooks. I'd be in class and I'd be hiding it in my Texas history textbook. Couldn't put it down. Jim Morrison, never. No One Here Gets Out Alive. And I later learned that book was the industry standard. I think that's the best-selling rock biography ever, and basically established the genre. Isn't that something? And so my life was like insanely overdetermined that way.
Yeah. I mean, we also were talking about this the other day about this particular genre, and my sense is that that we're living in the twilight. I mean, we're talking about Nietzsche. We're living in the twilight of the age of the rock biography. That it was that
it ends with.
It's a great moment for rock memoir for some reason. There's been this shift from great biographical writing to great memoirs and autobiographies by pop and rock stars. And I'm throwing pop and rock together. And it's also really seems like it's a great time for biographical films. I mean, we were talking about the Amy Winehouse film the other day, which I think is one of the most powerful films and biographies, regardless of subject, that I've seen in the last several years.
Yes.
But it doesn't seem like it's a great moment. And I wonder if you think about writing this
for the
book
music or for the writing?
For rock biographies as a type of biography. It's a particular genre that we can recognize. The early ones, the middle ones, we can see this genre developing. You can see the auteurs of the genre, the Nick Tosches.
Peter Gronick.
Yeah, Peter Gronick.
Yeah.
And do you think about that at all in relationship to, this is already a very recognizable type of biographical writing.
Well, my models were very literary.
Yeah.
You know, I wasn't thinking of rock biography as a model. I mean, I read the Jim Morrison thing when I was 12, for God's sake. I mean, I wasn't thinking of that as an adult, although I still remember it. But no, I was thinking about Fred Kaplan's Henry James. Fred Kaplan used to teach her. And I was, of course, thinking of Richard Ellman's James Joyce. That, to me, had everything.
Yeah.
Richard Ellman's James Joyce does something that you would think a lot of biographies do, but they actually, very few of them actually do it as well as he did it. And that is that you have thorough discussions about each important literary work by James Joyce. They each get their own chapters. And he talked to Samuel Beckett, and he talked to all these other wonderful sources. So he did all the field work about the life. And so you have a representation about how the life pours into the work and vice versa.
Yeah.
But that book is about 1,000 pages. So I wanted to do something like that, but about half the length. But that was my model more than any book about a musician.
Well, in that relationship between criticism and biography, you know, we like to talk about, a lot of times I think that if a biography of an artist comes in for a particular kind of criticism, it often has to do with the fact that the critical readings are weak. In this case, yours are extremely strong.
Thank you.
And I think, like I say, it was one of the real, you know, it's one of the real distinguishing features of the book. I'm wondering, as you worked on the biography for a number of years, you know, how did your position as a critic change in regard to her music?
I like that question tremendously. Before I took this on, I had a music critic attitude about Joni Mitchell, which was that I thought that there were 10 albums by her which were just spectacular and the best, there's nothing like it, right? Unparalleled in any genre. And then she becomes disappointing. And then the sounds, especially 2 albums from the 80s with a lot of synthesizers on them, they sound very dated.
Yeah.
But I stopped caring about that completely because I started seeing it as part of the life, including living through the times and being fascinated with the way her voice changed. And, you know, it's sort of like with Dylan. I mean, I love the voice on Time Out of Mind and Love and Theft. And sometimes you feel ravaged and you want to hear a voice that sounds more like a cement mixer. You know, Joni's voice never sounded like a cement mixer, but it certainly became more ravaged over time.
Yeah.
But that fit the material. It was like a method actor, you know. And so when these wonderful songs on Turbulent Indigo, like Sire of Sorrow, or Sex Kills, or the title track. You know, you don't want to hear those songs sung by the ingenue. You want to hear them sung by Joni in her 50s. And some people actually like the Both Sides Now that she did in her 50s better than the Both Sides Now that she recorded for Clouds in 1969.
Yeah.
So it certainly, you know, the person that made Love Actually thought that, you know, worked for that film. And anyway, and so, yes, do I still make distinctions? I do. I mean, do I like certain Joni Mitchell albums better than others? I do, but liking the albums becomes the least interesting part of it because the life is the most fascinating part. And that means I want to hear her go through her changes. And I don't want to hear her, you know, even if there's certain periods that I think are particularly inspired. Being inspired isn't what it's all about either. I want to hear her be less inspired. I want to hear, I mean, honestly, I think that you could, the first time I taught a Joni Mitchell class, we ran out of time in 1979. We ran out of time with Mingus, which is a great time to run out of time.
Yeah, that's exactly when you would normally.
That's a great spot. But on the other hand, yeah, but I didn't want to give them the impression that she stopped making great songs after that. And so I made a mix CD for all of the students, and I could pick, you know, a few songs from each one of those post-Mingus albums and make the case that they're really great songs. Maybe not every song on every album is consistently great. I think it's kind of freakish how on those first 10 albums, to me, you have this consistent quality, which is highly unusual. Even the Beatles didn't have that. You know, the Beatles had some clunkers. You know, not every track was perfect.
Yeah.
But with Joni, I think that the quality is so high between Song to a Seagull and Mingus, the first 10 albums. that after that, the consistency drops, but the great songs are still great, and they're great in different ways, too.
Well, I think you spend a really interesting amount of time on the Mingus project. I think it's actually, it emerges, I think, from reading the book as one of your strongest readings.
Thank you.
Which is kind of an interesting way to decenter and recenter her career.
It's a misunderstood album, I think,
Uh-huh.
by a lot of people, including by me before I wrote it. I talked to the drummer on this album, Peter Erskine, who was also the Weather Report drummer, and I talked to him about the album. I really talked to him because my life was truly overdetermined because I interviewed Pat Metheny for my high school paper. Okay, and I talked to him about who didn't, and I talked to him about Joni. And he didn't want to talk to me later, but I had that. Okay. And so that's why when you look in the back and you see sources, everybody is like 2014 and so, but like Pat Metheny is 1990 because it was for my school paper.
Where did you?
Or 1989.
Where did you grow up at that?
Dallas. Oh, because I went to a performing arts high school.
Okay.
And anyway, I talked to him about the band, the Shadows and Light band, the band from the 1979 tour. Joni wanted to get Weather Report, but she couldn't get them, so she put together this other band, and Pat Metheny became the musical director.
Yeah.
And I asked him, and of course I was obsessed with Joni already when I was 16, and so I wanted to know everything about that band and about the tour and so on. And he said, having a band of musicians of that caliber doing what we were doing was sort of like taking a Ferrari and driving it around the block. That was Pat Metheny's attitude. And so I kind of adopted that. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah.
And so I give this back to Peter Erskine, and I said, why? And I talked to Herbie Hancock about this also. Why are there no solos on Mingus? Why are all of the solos playing behind the vocal? Usually on a jazz album, you get solos. That was part of what makes it jazz, I would think. But he said, no, if you think about it, because every song but one with the band of the Mingus compositions, they were all ballads except for one track, the Dry Cleaner from Des Moines, which was like mid-tempo. Everything else is a ballad. So he said he felt really uncomfortable playing at those tempos because he was used to playing Weather Report, playing fast tempos. So he said he couldn't have handled playing, if it had been one bar longer, he couldn't have taken it.
Yeah.
So that was interesting. And then also, I really just thought about the whole thing being guided by a voice. Joni is taking on the voice of Charles Mingus. He's given her his final melodies, and she's written these lyrics that she's taking on his voice when he's losing the ability to speak because of his Lou Gehrig's disease. And so I thought, God, these genre distinctions are so uninteresting. Who cares?
Yeah.
Who cares if there are solos or not? Who cares? I mean, Herbie told me that he and Wayne wanted to get to that anyway. They were tired of like solo. They were tired of it. They wanted to do something different. And also Weather Report had this ethos, which was we always solo, we never solo.
Well, it's that I think that part of the book, it's really clear how deep your research and knowledge that really comes through. Leading up to that point when she is becoming a massive star and a real celebrity. Did you feel like you were able to sort of have access to everybody that you needed to get a full picture of that? I mean, she kind of comes through in this incredibly clear way. And I'm wondering, you also were able to interview, it seems like, most everyone around her. What was that experience like
there's always the biographer? There's always the one that got away. But yes, I felt very lucky to talk to the people I talked to, absolutely. And there were some things that didn't even make it into the book, but I still carried with me, like Nathan Joseph, for example, the sculptor. He told me about how the first night that they met, she laid a kiss on him, and he was absolutely terrified. And this is like a very macho guy. This is like a macho Israeli guy. He was dating Ellen Barkin at the time. He was like quite the ladies' man, okay? But he was terrified of Joni Mitchell. Why? Because he thought that she could swallow him up, you know? And so they have this affair, and it lasts about a year. It's not an official relationship. She's in a relationship with Don Elias. He has got other things going on, too.
Uh-huh.
And when it turns into friendship, when the sexual part ends after about a year, he's relieved. He's relieved because he hasn't been destroyed. Mm-hmm. And so I just thought about what that must have been like to be kissed by Joni Mitchell like that and to feel like you could have your soul sucked out by this incredibly powerful genius.
Mm-hmm. Wow. Well, that's a pretty incredible story. I think that I want to ask you there are a couple of quotes that you used to kind of, what I should say is that the biography it's very strong on quoted material. Mm-hmm. I mean, there are a lot of Joni Mitchell quotes. In fact, I think my impression from reading the biography is it's much more novelistic and much more quote heavy, if I can use that term, than most biographies. You don't do a lot of paraphrasing. You let the microphone run when Joni's in front of it.
Because she's so, her way of saying things is so idiosyncratic. I wouldn't want to take the personality out of it, you know.
Well, you were not tempted to,
Oh no, you would
go in and trim it a bit.
You'd be, you'd be amazed at what's not here. I mean, I turned in a manuscript that was like 750 pages. Uh-huh. We took that and cut it down to 500 pages.
Yeah.
So a lot got pruned. A lot of stories. She had her storytelling style is very Baroque.
Yeah, it really comes through.
And so we had to do a lot of cutting.
Uh-huh.
So I know it seems like a lot to you, but in fact a lot was cut to make it into that.
Well, she gets into, I mean, there's some really terrific quotes that I noticed that when I was reading that would pop up, and then you would see that when you would read a review, you would notice that the reviewers were also kind of, attracted by the same quote. Mm-hmm. It's always a sign of a strong quote. Mm-hmm. And I was just going to ask you about a couple of them and see if you would, say a little bit about them and what they kind of say about Joni's personality and about the role in the biography, her place in the biography, her presence here. The first one is a quote where she says, "If I experience any frustration, it's the frustration of being misunderstood." Mm-hmm. But that's what stardom is, a glamorous misunderstanding.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. That's a great line.
What does she mean by that?
Oh,
How does that relate to your own kind of approach in this biography?
When she was 16, she was having her hair done for prom. Mm-hmm. And it was a very, 1961 elaborate hairdo, right? And so while she was getting her hair done, she was reading like a teen magazine about Sandra Dee breaking up with Bobby Darin. And she immediately just felt sorry for those people, these poor people. And she wrote a poem inspired by it that she published in the school paper called The Fishbowl. So even when she was 15, she wasn't thinking, ooh, I want to be them. She was thinking, those poor people. And so that's the glamorous misunderstanding. Yeah. I remember I asked her, when we were talking about 1973, right? David Geffen summons her from her property in British Columbia to live with him and Cher.
Right, because he's dating Cher.
He's dating Cher, in a rented house in the Hollywood Hills that's owned by Blake Edwards and Julie Andrews. Uh-huh. And while that was happening, she was regularly hit on by Jack Nicholson and Warren Beatty. And I asked her really, I knew I was asking a dumb question, but I knew that it would elicit an interesting response. I said, was that fun?
Uh-huh.
She was like, fun? She said, celebrities are not fun. They're neurotic, sick people, Uh-huh. And, but she was in the thick of it. And so she loved telling these stories, and then she sort of hated that she loved telling them. But she, she was seeing a psychoanalyst, this Freudian psychoanalyst. It was referred to her by Warren Beatty. Warren Beatty referred her to him because she didn't want to sleep with him. And so, so then this guy would say to her, you're just like Marilyn Monroe, because he'd been Marilyn Monroe's psychologist. And she said, gee, that's not a good recommendation, is it? Okay. And then you're just like John Lennon. He was treating John Lennon at the same time. And then he said, why do you call him the pussycat? He's a German guy. Why do you call him the pussycat? And of course, it was obvious to her and to most people. He wrote, he was the inspiration for What's New Pussycat, Woody Allen's first produced screenplay. The character played by Peter O'Toole was based on Warren Beatty, and that was Warren Beatty's pickup line in the pre-Me Too era, and so he said, anyway, it was just so ridiculous, and he said, she said, listen, Warren is not my problem. He said, no, but you are his. It was just crazy.
Well.
It was just crazy. But I mean,
It's insightful. There's another quote I was going to mention, and I'm just going to say this, and then, because I think it's really, you use it a couple of times, or I think you used it a couple of times. Certainly people picked up on this, but then I see the time, we should probably see if people have questions. But at the end of the decade, she says that she compares herself to a cellophane wrapper on a pack of cigarettes, which is just like such an incredible way to talk about yourself. But also considering your relationship to smoking.
Yes, of course, and that was
And to vulnerability.
That was her describing the condition she was in when she made Blue. And Joni liked to say, "Do you get the picture?" Because she liked to, when she would say something like that, it was just so vivid that then she would say, "Do you get the picture?" And that's what she would say about a lot of her lyrics too. Do you get the picture?
Yeah. When I read quotes like that, it's really clear why you wanted to structure this biography around her words. They're really powerful and really strong, and you're a very good, incredibly good listener. Why don't we see if people have questions or observations they want to make?
Yes. Hi.
Hi. I've already read the book.
Oh, thank you.
It's quite fascinating.
Oh, thank you.
In a lot of ways, anyhow, I have a loud voice. There it is. In a lot of ways, it's sad because, first of all, she dumps on an awful lot of people.
Yeah.
And however much we may love her, it's unfortunate that she turns out to be, not as nice a person as perhaps we would want. And then again, that's true of almost every narcissistic genius in the history of the world. But two quick questions. The first is, do you know the current state of her health?
Yeah, we can talk about that. But what's your other question?
Oh, it's not really a question, but when you mentioned Prince and his curly cues, I thought of A Case of You, and I saw the You, and his version of A Case of You is one of the absolutely great versions of that song ever made, aside from the one that she made herself.
Yeah.
And but
That's spectacular. I love it.
You don't mention you mention the song, of course, in the book, and the fact that he loved her music, but I don't think you mentioned that he actually went so far as to record it.
Well, there are a lot of people who recorded covers of Joni. I mean, in fact, Joni started out as a covers artist, let's face it. I mean, she started out being covered by Judy Collins.
And she has a nasty comment about Judy Collins that's so unwarranted.
There's a lot of vibe.
Well, I'll tell you about something about that, and then I'll tell you about her health. I talked to Leonard Cohen like a day before my final interview with Joni, and Joni was giving me a really hard time. At the time she was having a rough week, and she said, "I'm surrounded by leeches. What kind of leech are you?" And I ran this by Leonard Cohen, and he said, "A Jewish leech?" But we talked, Leonard and I really talked about everything, but including every aspect of Joni, from the beautiful to the most vicious, all of it. And he said, he said, there's a quotation I really like from the French playwright Pierre de Marivaux. In this world, one must be a little too kind to be kind enough. And he said, I really like that quotation, and I try to live by it. On the other hand, there's a seat at the table of the gods reserved for the people who cut you down to keep it interesting, to keep things away from the usual banalities. You're never bored. He said, I understand that it puts you in a difficult position, but I could see what he was seeing, the wisdom of what he was saying. I could see it. And of course, it makes her a great character for a book. About her health, she had a cerebral aneurysm. It was reported on March 31st, 2015. And as you can imagine, the day that the news hit, everybody that I knew sent me emails about it. One of those emails was from Leonard Cohen. More about that in a minute. But it took her 3 days to be found, and she was deprived of oxygen and food and water. And it's quite miraculous that she was even alive when she was found. And so now she's still in a wheelchair, but she's not always in the wheelchair. She's gone through a lot of physical therapy. And she recently had a birthday party on November 7th. And it was a formal party, men in tuxes, women in gowns. It was a 1940s theme. And she was wearing a beautiful gown. And I saw this picture of her dancing with her friend Charles Valentino. Charles Valentino was a Broadway dancer. He was in the original cast of The Wiz. The worst thing that ever happened to his career is when a movie was made of The Wiz, and his role of the Scarecrow was played by somebody named Michael Jackson. Mm-hmm. Anyway, so you see her with Val, and he's really propping her up, and she's clinging for dear life. You can see that but she's also happy, though. She's so happy to be dancing, even if it means clinging to her friend. So,
I don't know anything about Joni Mitchell.
you do now. Yeah.
But we did haul this piano up
Oh, yes,
here.
yes.
I was wondering if you could maybe just play even just a few bars to give me a sense of
Sure.
why she's so important to you.
Sure. One place that I'll start, because I imagined especially shortly after her aneurysm, I thought that maybe the best way to communicate with her was to play her favorite intervals. And so, this is her favorite interval. Right? And so she uses that in Court and Sparks, she uses that in Blue, the arrangement, right? And so she doesn't know the names of chords or of notes even. And so she's very annoyed with people who have perfect pitch because she doesn't know if she has it or not. But she's worked with people who definitely have it, Jaco Pastorius, Charles Mingus, Herbie Hancock, Wayne Shorter, and others. And she had this whole trip, and she said, if you're taught to learn your notes the way you're taught to learn your colors, then you have perfect pitch, which is not the way it works at all. But then she told me, we were in her kitchen, we were singing. We were singing this Wayne Shorter composition called Nefertiti. Sorry. I'm so sorry. Something like that. So I was singing this with Joni, right? da 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 da. It's a hard thing to sing. So we were singing it together, and then she just stopped and she said, "You may have perfect pitch, but you do not have perfect intonation." I said, "I know." Imagine being told this by one of the greatest singers of the recording era. Yes, sir.
She came up with the sonorities of the harmonies and stuff. To what degree did any of her harmonies develop on the piano, and to what degree do you think they're almost all kind of open tuning guitar, Joni Mitchell guitar playing harmonies?
That's a great question. So, Joni begins using open tunings because her polio makes it impossible for her to play standard tuning. And
She had polio when she was growing up in Canada.
Yeah, she had polio at the age of 10.
And that made it so that she couldn't use her left hand.
She had weakness in her left hand from the polio. And so, like a lot of musicians of that generation, including Bob Dylan, she tried to learn guitar through the Pete Seeger book. It's the same book my dad learned banjo from. And
she started out with the ukulele,
started with the uke. And so there was a section called Cotton Pickin', C-O-T-T-E-N. Pete Seeger his family had a maid named Elizabeth Cotton. And so she would play the banjo with this 1-5. Simple. 1-5.
That sounds like Raised on Robbery.
Yeah.
Exactly, yeah.
But she couldn't, so it was a simple thing. See, folk music is just these simple triads. It's like D, these are full chords. As soon as she started writing music, she wasn't writing those chords and she wasn't writing folk music. She was influenced by romantic music. She was influenced by the Great American Songbook. Her music didn't sound anything like folk music, except that she was playing an acoustic guitar. And so, so she develops these very elaborate open tunings. And so she would literally compose by finding a new tuning. That's how she would compose, by finding a new tuning. And she ended up having 62 different open tunings, which is crazy. There's someone named Michael Hedges who is in that stratosphere, but there are very few people that do that. For example, when Keith Richards learns open G, that was it, and everything he writes is a riff and open. Do you know what I'm saying? That's all he does. He learns one. And then 1 second, I will. But with piano, Joni had piano lessons when she was 7 and 8, and she composed her first song. It was called Robin Walk, and her teacher would hit her with the ruler for improvising. Why would you want to improvise? Whack! When you can have the masters at your fingertips, whack. And so she didn't realize that every piano teacher of that generation did that. She thought that was just for her. Later, when she talked to other people, including my mother's piano teacher did that also. So they all did in that generation. They just did. So that's why she gave up piano lessons, and her mother called her a quitter. Okay? Didn't touch the piano after that. Didn't touch it. So when she's recording her first album, produced by David Crosby, Song to a Seagull, there's a track on there, Night in the City. And she wanted to add something that was like this. Something like that, just a simple little bluesy thing. And so Joni's like, hey, I want to record the piano part. And it takes her like 20 minutes to work it out, because she had not touched a piano since she was 8. Mm-hmm. And Crosby said, shouldn't we get a real piano player, man? But she recorded it. And so then when she moves to Laurel Canyon, Leonard Cohen actually told me that he happened to be there when that piano was delivered, right? And so as soon as she's got this thing in front of her, now she doesn't know the names of notes, nothing. She's got this chromatic harmony that's absolutely intuitive, rather extraordinary. She's like born straight out of the God's head, right? And so suddenly she's composing. She's doing this. And one of the first things that she writes on piano is about Leonard, Rainy Night House, right? That was one of the first songs song she did on piano was that one, Rainy Night House. Beautiful. And then, of course, the Miles the Viol's version is so cool. I really like the So,
That was the first time she played since she was 6?
yeah, first for that night for the studio bit for Night in the City, and then it comes in the mail, and immediately she just starts writing. And then like she and Graham Nash, Graham is living there, and they're fighting over the piano, you know, and so like, and Graham is like, you know. I said to Joni, I said, come on. How long was that going to last, really? Well, she said her answer then was different from her answer later, because her answer then was, she said, well, I love the man, so I can't say a bad word about him. But then he wrote a memoir called Wild Tales, and she was really pissed about it. And, so
then she could say plenty of
Yeah,
bad things about him, yeah.
Did you had a question? Yes, please.
Open tuning mean?
So open tuning means that like the regular tuning of a guitar is like these notes, right? And then that's what you base it on. But Joni would retune the guitar for every single thing she wrote. And so when she would play a concert, she would have maybe 3 songs in a given tuning, and then she would have to change it. And so, which she said was a total pain in the butt, but she didn't know what else to do. Now here's an interesting unintended consequence. She did this out of necessity, right? She did this because of her polio weakened left hand. But, in fact, the result of this was that, and you don't even have to know anything about music to know this, is that the resonances of open tuning sound a lot different than the resonances of standard tuning, okay? In other words, when a note lingers, and this is true on the piano too, when a note lingers, see, these notes are resonating. There are these overtones of the notes that are resonating, right? You keep on listening, and there are more, you can hear more notes that are being implied by the notes that I played. Well, there's more of that in an open-tuned guitar than there is on a standard-tuned guitar. And so that's why her guitar playing sounds different than anybody else's guitar playing. Now, she didn't set out to have a different sound, but what a wonderful result, you know? Yes?
Wow. You said so much. First of all, I am up to Dominguez,
Oh.
chapter 24.
Cool.
And I totally applaud Joni's honesty and forthrightness and uncensored comments on her colleagues and fellow musicians. I feel like she speaks with complete admiration and cavelling. How's the word? No, she gives so much applause to the people she respects, and the people she doesn't respect so much musically, she says, not so good. I mean, it's not so good. And I read Joan Baez's memoir and Judy Collins' memoir, and they didn't like her either. So it's no bad thing to not like, more some people more than others. But I have a question for you. As you see my Joni
Yeah,
Mitchell
you're Joni.
20
Yeah.
tribute wig. I have one for Tina Turner, Chaka Khan. All right, I have a few tribute wigs.
I have a shocking story to tell you, too.
Oh, thank you. All right. But I noticed, and I was telling my husband, first of all, my husband's an academic, and I have been saying for years that there's no such thing as a PhD who can write. I stand corrected.
Wow.
All right, now I
Wow.
bow down to you because you do write beautifully.
Thank
And
you.
I can understand. I haven't had to use my dictionary once. And I've been listening to my Joni canon with new ears.
Oh,
now,
cool.
and I really understand because she's
Thank
a
you.
short story writer. So
Yeah.
every song is a short story.
Yeah,
and
yeah.
now I understand the story behind the story.
Oh, cool.
So it's a whole, now I understand why. Anyway, my question, I noticed you used the word beautiful in reference to Joni Mitchell about 1,000 times and 100 pages. And in the 40 years that I've been listening to Joni, I've never heard a single person refer to her as beautiful. But I see you found zillions of quotes calling her a great beauty. I noticed when you were speaking to the interviewer that you sort of started looking at her as more mortal in 2014. And I noticed that the comments on her beauty also stopped at that point. Is there a connection?
Well, I wanted to get across certainly that the Joni that I talked to in the kitchen in early 2015 had a tremendous beauty to her still. And in fact, I thought that she had more beauty under the fluorescent light of the kitchen than in the Yves Saint Laurent pictures, where I felt like there was almost this Diane Arbus effect. They wanted to make her look more like a freak show, I thought. I thought she still had a beauty to her. But I also thought that that beauty was a manifestation of her whole being, you know, that she had these magnificently carved features, you know, but that she was aware of herself as a beauty, embodying beauty and making something beautiful that was about beauty. Do you know what I mean? Like there's that fantastic song, Sweet Bird, on Hissing of Summer Lawns. Behind our eyes, calendars of our lives, circled with compromise. Out on this horizon of mine, sweet bird of change in time, you must be laughing. Wow. I mean, that is that's a philosophical investigation into beauty. It's a poetic investigation into beauty. The paintings are, but she is also aware that she herself is beautiful. So there's nothing surface about it, although that too, but not only. You know, that's what makes it fascinating. That's what makes it so fascinating, is that you just, and also that there's a sensory overload to the whole quality. I remember the first time when we were at her house, and she wanted to listen to the new tracks for Shine, which nobody had ever heard. And I couldn't believe it, tracks from a new Joni Mitchell record. And yet she kept on wanting to talk to me during the playback. And Joni, oh my God, if you lose eye contact for a second, it's subterfuge, right? She's like, what's the matter? Yeah, and that picture of her, like that. Yeah, like that.
Communications that you've conveyed in this book convey as a forthright, honest, direct person who's not afraid of you, the reader or the listener. She has no fear of your opinion of her and what she thinks.
No.
And that's my kind of moment.
Let's take maybe one more question.
I think that's my fate. Yes. Wait, but yeah. Maybe both of them.
Okay.
Okay. Quick, boring question. Her health, can she speak?
Yes,
Is
yes.
she's aware, she can think she's...
Yes. Her
So there
short-term-
was no brain damage?
No, there's some brain damage. I mean, her short-term memory is not 100%.
Okay. Will
But-
she ever sing again? I mean, I
No.
know she kind of stopped.
No.
And
I don't think so.
Right. Has she talked to you? I haven't read your book. So if I ask you these two questions and they're in the book, pass me over to someone else. Has she ever talked to you about how she feels about losing her voice? Whereas I know she's an older age and many people lose their voice, but so many don't. And she really kind of has
Right.
lost it. And how she feels about that. And what was the biggest surprise for you in interviewing her? What you found, how she turned out to be that you didn't think she would be?
Well, of course, she was always honest about everything. She was very frank about everything, and so, including the state of her voice. And so the last time that she performed in public, which entailed at the Luminato Festival in 2013, which entailed singing a couple of songs for a couple of nights.
Right. And you
And
can
she
tell
had to go on vocal rest for 2 months after that. It really was exhausting to her. And it was shocking, too, because the later period Joni remained the same for a while. I would say like the voice on Shine in 2007 wasn't really that different from the voice on Taming the Tiger 10 years earlier. So it was shocking, the degree of decay that had occurred after that. And so and she talked about this with John Pirelli's. When she said, oh, I have about, I used to have this 3-octave range and now I have 4 or 5 iffy notes. So she was and she wasn't even sure if the singing would work out, too. So she could have just spoken her way through. She thought if she,
but she did.
but she did sing, and I couldn't believe it. So that's, and then you asked me
The biggest surprise.
the biggest surprise. Well, I was surprised that she had such little interest in poetry.
Oh, my God.
Somebody who wrote such great lyrics and who set Yeats's Second Coming to music in a song called Slouching Towards Bethlehem. It was amazing the degree to which she really didn't like poetry, just didn't care about it. And it was ridiculous, but like I would try reading her poems to see what and of course she hated everything. So like I read her like Robert Lowell epilogue, and she said, it's a poem by an impotent poet for other impotent poets. And then she said, Fellini did it better in 8.5. Next. Then I read her Elizabeth Bishop, One Art, which is a poem most people like. And she said, that's much ado about nothing, isn't it? And I said, wait a minute, do you mean it's like Shakespeare or do you mean it's nothing? She said, it's nothing. So it just was just ridiculous. And so like, finally, I read her Keats' Ode on Melancholy, which was a poem that she hadn't thought about since high school. And I had this recording of F. Scott Fitzgerald reading it from memory, and he gives up. He makes mistakes and then he gives up, and he sounds drunk. And so I was so taken with this F. Scott Fitzgerald recording that I imitated the way he read it. And so she interrupted me in the middle. She said, okay, that's a great poem, but I can't stand the way you're reading it. It's so maudlin. So, sir.
So this may be a stupid question for a biographer, but after the comment from the front row that Joni would express her opinion without caring what anybody thought of her. You obviously have a very special relationship with her. You gained access that many people haven't had. Mm-hmm. Is there anything that's written in the book that you intend for her? So the anticipation, as you said, a lot of people who have had close relationships with her have eventually lost their relationship to her. Did you consciously try to avoid that? Or is there anything
That's funny. I mean, like Dan Chasen, who reviewed it in the New Yorker, said that he thought that I was trying to hang in there or something. And he said, add Yaffe to the list of men that she plays like a paddle ball.
Yeah.
Which I thought was great, actually. But I mean, I was really grateful for that. But I don't mean that. I'm sincerely grateful for that. But God, I guess this might be an unsatisfying answer to you, but I guess that was both like always there and never there. Do you know what I mean? I always knew that she could, but I wasn't reading with her breathing down my neck. Do you know what I mean?
Do you assume that if she read the book, she would like it? Based on her not liking anything?
She doesn't like anything, right? She doesn't like anything. I mean, but
Because that's free. You know that that's sort of
yeah, she doesn't like anything. So at least I want to be like the best of the worst, I guess.
All right, we should You're in a good group, so
I am. I mean, this group.
with the
yeah.
opportunity to have this conversation. And
Thank you,
you
everybody.
all.
Yeah.